A single piece of paper can be the difference between a massive tip and a bloodbath. When 24-year-old waitress Aurora handed a receipt to Chicago's most feared man, she didn't just circle her tip. She circled the words, "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." What followed changed everything. The St. Regis Chop House on Rush Street was the kind of establishment where Chicago's elite went to chew on $80 dry-aged ribeyes and pretend they owned the city. It smelled of truffle butter, expensive cigar smoke lingering from the patio, and old money. For Aurora Bennett, it was just a place to wear a stiff white button-down, smile until her cheeks ached, and chip away at the crushing medical debt her mother had left behind. It was a rainy Tuesday night in November, the kind of evening where the restaurant was only half full, bathed in the dim, golden glow of brass chandeliers. Aurora was working Section 4, the secluded booths in the back, typically reserved for politicians, celebrities, or men who didn't want their faces caught on the street-facing windows. Tonight, Booth 42 was occupied by Damien Russo. Everyone in the service industry downtown knew who Damien Russo was, even if the Chicago Tribune only referred to him as a prominent logistics entrepreneur. At 32, Damien was the undisputed head of the Russo syndicate. He possessed a terrifying stillness, a sharp, dark-haired man who wore bespoke charcoal suits and a vintage Patek Philippe watch that cost more than Aurora's life insurance policy. He didn't bark orders or treat the staff like servants. He was meticulously polite, tipped a staggering 100%, and tipped in crisp, uncreased hundreds. But tonight, the air around Damien's table was thick with a suffocating tension. He was dining with Carmine Moretti, a notorious capo from the rival Lucchese family. Carmine was a stark contrast to Damien, sweaty, boisterous, wearing too much cologne, and constantly glancing at his phone. They were supposedly negotiating a truce over the South Side shipping routes, but Aurora, whose older brother Tommy had once run illegal sports bets for a small-time crew, knew the subtle language of the streets. She recognized the signs of a bad deal. Carmine was overcompensating, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and he hadn't touched his $400 bottle of Opus One. At 10:15 p.m., the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant swung open. A man stepped inside, shaking off a soaked trench coat. Aurora was standing by the POS terminal, punching in an order for a side of creamed spinach, when she noticed him. The newcomer didn't wait for the hostess. He bypassed the dining room entirely and took a seat at the far end of the mahogany bar, ordering a club soda. He kept his leather gloves on. More importantly, Aurora noticed his eyes. He wasn't watching the bartender. He was staring dead into the massive antique mirror behind the bar, a mirror that offered a perfect, unobstructed reflection of Booth 42, where Damien sat with his back to the room. Aurora felt a cold prickle of dread wash over the back of her neck. She watched as Carmine subtly tapped his water glass twice. In the mirror, the man in the trench coat reached slowly into his coat pocket. It was a setup. Carmine had lured Damien out of his heavily guarded stronghold in the West Loop into neutral territory. The truce was a lie. If that man pulled a trigger, Damien Russo would be dead before his stake arrived. But Aurora's mind raced past Damien to the immediate collateral damage. If bullets started flying in the enclosed dining room, the ensuing crossfire would be a massacre. Waiters, bartenders, innocent diners, they would all be caught in the meat grinder. She couldn't just stand there. And deep down, despite who Damien was, she remembered the night a drunken patron had grabbed her waist, and Damien had quietly stepped in, giving the man a look so chilling the patron practically ran out of the restaurant. Damien was a monster, perhaps, but he was a monster with a code. Carmine suddenly stood up, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Excuse me for a second, Damien. Need to use the men's room. Order us another bottle of the Opus, will you?" It was the oldest trick in the book. The hit was going down the second Carmine was clear of the blast zone. Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had exactly 30 seconds. She rushed back to the terminal, her hands shaking so badly she miskeyed her passcode twice. Finally, she logged in and printed Damien's check. She grabbed a thick red Sharpie from the server station. On the back of the itemized receipt, she wrote 3 desperate, frantic sentences. She pressed so hard the red ink bled through the thermal paper. "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." She drew a heavy, frantic circle around the words, shoved the receipt into the sleek black leather check presenter, and took a deep breath, forcing her trembling hands to steady. She pasted on her best, oblivious customer service smile and walked toward booth 42. The man at the bar was completely turned around now, the club soda ignored. His right hand was fully inside his coat, and he was sliding off his stool, taking a slow step toward the dining room floor. Aurora reached the table. Damien was casually checking his watch, his face impassive. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Russo," Aurora said, her voice remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Your driver called the front desk. He asked me to give this to you immediately." Damien's dark eyes flicked up to hers. His brow furrowed just a fraction. He knew his driver, Rocco, would never call the front desk. Rocco had a direct line to his earpiece. Aurora didn't wait for him to question her. She placed the black leather book on the table, leaned in just an inch, and firmly tapped her index finger against the leather cover twice. The eye contact she held with him wasn't the polite, deferential gaze of a waitress. It was a screaming, desperate warning. Damien didn't say a word. He flipped the leather book open. His eyes locked onto the aggressive red ink, the heavy circles around the words gunman, deal and exit. For one agonizing second, time in the St. Regis chop house stood completely still. Damien Russo did not gasp. He did not look over his shoulder. He did not give the hitman a single microscopic tell that the ambush had been compromised. Instead, he looked calmly up at Aurora, his dark eyes turning into shards of black ice. "Thank you, Aurora," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly hum that sent a shiver down her spine. "Get down." Before Aurora's brain could even process the command, all hell broke loose. Damien's right hand shot beneath his tailored jacket, while his left hand gripped the edge of the massive 500-pound oak dining table. With a sudden, explosive surge of brute strength, he kicked upward and flipped the table. Plates shattered, silverware clattered, and the half-empty bottle of Opus 1 exploded in a spray of deep red wine that looked terrifyingly like blood. Pfft, pfft, pfft. The muffled mechanical spits of a suppressed 9mm handgun ripped through the air. The leather upholstery of the booth, where Damien's chest had been, a millisecond prior, ruptured, spitting cotton and foam into the air. Screams erupted across the restaurant. Diners dove under tables. The elegant, sophisticated hum of the St. Regis instantly dissolved into pure, primal chaos. Aurora shrieked, dropping to her knees behind the heavy wooden pillar of the server station. She covered her head, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps as glass rained down around her. From behind the overturned table, Damien returned fire. The deafening crack of his us-silenced Glock 19 echoed like a cannon in the dining room. One shot, 2 shots. A heavy thud told Aurora the gunman from the bar had gone down. But the nightmare wasn't over. The front doors of the restaurant burst open. 3 more men in heavy coats flooded in. Carmine's backup crew. They didn't care about collateral damage. They raised automatic weapons, and the dining room became a war zone. Wood splintered, chandeliers shattered, and drywall dusted the air like snow. Suddenly, a strong, unyielding hand clamped onto Aurora's wrist. She screamed, kicking out, but she was hauled violently to her feet. It was Damien. His bespoke suit was covered in white drywall dust, and a thin line of blood trickled down his cheek, where a piece of flying crystal had grazed him. But his eyes were terrifyingly focused. "Move!" he roared over the gunfire. He didn't give her a choice. Pulling her with enough force to nearly dislocate her shoulder, he dragged her away from the service station, just as a volley of bullets shredded the wooden pillar she had been hiding behind. They sprinted toward the kitchen doors. Damien fired blindly over his shoulder, suppressing the advancing hitmen just long enough to kick the silver double doors open. They burst into the kitchen, a stark contrast of gleaming stainless steel and blinding white fluorescent lights. Chefs were already on the floor, hands over their heads, screaming in Spanish and English. The smell of searing Wagyu beef mixed violently with the acrid stench of cordite and gun smoke. "Out the back! Keep your head down!" Damien barked, practically shoving Aurora down the narrow aisle between the prep stations and the blazing stoves. Bullets punched through the kitchen doors behind them, pinging wildly off hanging copper pots and shattering industrial glass refrigerators. Aurora was crying now, tears of pure adrenaline blurring her vision, her non-slip waitress shoes sliding on a puddle of spilled olive oil. Damien caught her before she fell, his arm wrapping around her waist like a vice, half carrying her toward the red glow of the exit sign. He kicked the heavy steel fire door open, and they spilled out into the freezing, rain-slicked alleyway of downtown Chicago. The cold air hit Aurora like a slap to the face, but there was no time to breathe. A massive, heavily armored black Mercedes G-Wagon was idling aggressively in the alley, its headlights off. The rear door was already flung wide open. Standing beside it, laying down heavy cover fire with an assault rifle toward the mouth of the alley, was Rocco, Damien's hulking enforcer. "Get in! Get in!" Rocco bellowed over the roar of the weapon. Damien threw Aurora into the back seat and dove in right behind her. Rocco slammed the heavy ballistic door shut, jumping into the driver's seat. The G-Wagon's tires shrieked against the wet asphalt, fishtailing wildly for a second before the massive engine roared, launching the heavy vehicle out of the alley and into the chaotic Chicago traffic. Inside the SUV, the silence was deafening, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the engine and the frantic, shallow gasps of Aurora's breathing. She was pressed against the far door, trembling violently, staring at her blood-stained hands. She hadn't even realized she'd cut herself on the broken plates. The reality of what she had just done was crashing down on her like a collapsing building. She was an ordinary girl, a waitress, and she was sitting in a getaway car with the boss of the Chicago underworld. Damien was sitting next to her, staring straight ahead. He calmly popped the empty magazine out of his Glock, letting it clatter onto the floorboard, and slid a fresh one into the grip with a sharp, mechanical click. Slowly, he turned his head to look at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, terrifying clarity in his gaze. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt, the red Sharpie ink glaring in the dim streetlights passing by the tinted windows. "Carmine is a paranoid man," Damien said, his voice dangerously soft. "He wouldn't trust a random hit. He would have paid off someone on the inside to make sure the coast was clear. Someone in your restaurant tipped off those shooters when the time was right. Aurora shook her head frantically, terrified he thought it was her. I didn't. I swear, I just saw him at the bar, and I saw Carmine tap his glass, and my brother used to run with the Lucchese guys, so I knew what it meant. I was just trying to help. Damien held up a hand, silencing her. I know it wasn't you, Aurora. If you wanted me dead, you wouldn't have handed me this. He tapped the receipt. He leaned in closer, the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne enveloping her. But Carmine saw you hand me the checkbook. He saw me read it, and he saw me flip the table. He knows you warned me. Aurora's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying, Damien replied grimly, that Carmine Moretti is humiliated. He lost 3 men tonight, and he lost his chance to take my territory. In his eyes, a 24-year-old waitress just humiliated the Lucchese family. I have to go home, Aurora stammered, panic rising in her throat like bile. My apartment. My cat is there. I have to. If you go to your apartment tonight, you will be dead before sunrise, Damien stated flatly, stripping away any illusion she had left. They will burn your building to the ground just to make a point. He looked away, staring out the rain-streaked window into the darkness of the city he controlled. Rocco, take us to the Lake Forest compound. Wait, no! Aurora cried, pushing against the leather seat. You can't just kidnap me. I saved your life. Damien turned back to her, and for the first time, the cold, impenetrable mask slipped just a fraction, revealing something fierce and deeply protective underneath. You did save my life, Aurora Bennett, he said softly, holding her panicked gaze. And in my world, a life debt is the only currency that matters. You belong to me now, not as a prisoner, as my responsibility. And I promise you, as long as you are by my side, nobody from the Lucchese family will ever touch a hair on your head. The G-Wagon sped into the night, carrying Aurora far away from the life she had known, and plunging her violently into a dark, seductive world she could never, ever leave. The iron gates of the Lake Forest estate loomed like the entrance to a fortress, parting silently to let the battered G-Wagon slip onto the sprawling, manicured grounds. According to unsealed affidavits from Agent Robert Kessler of the Chicago FBI field office, who spent a decade trying to build a RICO case against the Russo family, this specific compound was impenetrable. Equipped with military-grade surveillance, reinforced steel panic rooms, and a private security detail of former Blackwater contractors, it was a gilded cage. And now, it was Aurora's new home. For the first 3 days, Aurora lived in a state of suspended reality. She was given a master suite overlooking the churning gray waters of Lake Michigan. Her closet was miraculously stocked with designer clothes in her exact size. Her favorite boutique soaps were in the marble bathroom, and meals prepared by a private chef were brought to her door. Yet the luxury felt suffocating. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the deafening crack of gunfire and saw the Opus One wine spraying across the pristine white tablecloth like arterial blood. Damien gave her space, though his presence saturated the massive house. She would see him from her balcony, standing by the seawall at dawn, smoking a single cigarette while talking quietly to Rocco. He moved like a shadow, commanding the sprawling criminal empire that operated beneath Chicago's glittering skyline. On the 4th night, the heavy oak door to her suite clicked open. Damien stepped inside. He had traded his tailored suits for a dark, fitted cashmere sweater and slacks, making him look less like a corporate CEO and more like the lethal predator she knew him to be. He carried a leather medical kit and a thick manila folder. "Sit," he commanded softly, gesturing to the velvet armchair near the fireplace. Aurora hesitated, then obeyed. Damien knelt in front of her, opening the medical kit. He gently took her right hand, inspecting the shallow, jagged cutters on her palms from the shattered restaurant glass. She hadn't let the estate's private doctor touch her. "You've been picking at them," he noted, his voice an intoxicating blend of reprimand and velvet. He produced a cotton swab dipped in antiseptic. "This will sting." "I can do it myself," she whispered, her pulse accelerating as his large, calloused fingers cradled her much smaller hand. "I know you can," Damien replied, not letting go. "But you shouldn't have to. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, Aurora. Let someone take care of you for a change." The sheer intimacy of his touch, contrasting with the horrific violence she had watched him commit, made her breath hitch. As he meticulously bandaged her hands, the silence between them thickened, shifting from traumatic shock to a heavy, unspoken attraction. Damien Russo was a man who took whatever he wanted, yet he treated her like something infinitely precious. "I have answers," he finally said, his tone shifting back to the icy pragmatism of a Mafia boss. He reached for the manila folder and dropped it onto her lap. "About the setup at the St. Regis." Aurora's stomach tightened. She opened the folder. Inside were grainy surveillance photographs, bank statements, and a printed transcript of a burner phone wiretap. "I told you Carmine wouldn't make a move unless he had an inside man," Damien said, standing up and pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch from a crystal decanter. "Someone to confirm my table, my security layout, and the exact moment my guard was down." Aurora stared at the first photograph. It was taken in the shadowy booth of a dive bar in the South Side. One figure was unmistakably Carmine Moretti. The other was a younger man, his shoulders hunched, handing over a padded envelope. The air left Aurora's lungs in a violent rush. The room began to spin. "No," she choked out, dropping the photo as if it were on fire. "No, that's impossible. He's out of the game. He promised me." "Your brother Tommy," Damien stated flatly, his dark eyes fixed on her pale face. "He owed $80,000 to a Lucchese sportsbook operation. Carmine offered to wipe the debt clean in exchange for the intel on my dinner meeting. Tommy gave them the blueprints to the restaurant and my reservation details." Tears spilled over Aurora's eyelashes, hot and fast. The betrayal sliced deeper than any glass. She had worked double shifts, ruined her feet, and endured harassment from customers to keep the lights on and pay off their mother's debts, all while Tommy was gambling away his life and ultimately bargaining with hers. "He didn't know I would be working that section," Aurora sobbed, burying her face in her bandaged hands. "He couldn't have known I'd be caught in the crossfire." "Ignorance is not an alibi in my world," Damien said coldly. "He sold me to my enemies. The penalty for that is death." Aurora shot up from the chair, her fear instantly vaporized by a surge of desperate, fierce protectiveness. She grabbed the collar of Damien's cashmere sweater, pulling him down to her eye level. "You promised me," she hissed, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "You told me in the car that my life debt meant something. You told me I was under your protection." Damien's hands clamped down on her hips, anchoring her to him. The proximity was electric. "You are under my protection, Aurora. Tommy is not." "He is my blood," she cried, her chest heaving against his. "If you kill him, you kill the only family I have left. Spare him, Damien. Please, for me." Damien stared down into her tear-filled, defiant eyes. A muscle feathered in his jaw. In the ruthless hierarchy of the Chicago syndicate, showing mercy to a rat was a sign of fatal weakness. It invited mutiny. But looking at the fierce, beautiful woman who had risked everything to save him, the icy fortress around Damien's heart cracked. "Carmine has him," Damien finally said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We intercepted chatter an hour ago. Carmine figured out Tommy's sister was the one who blew the hit. He kidnapped Tommy from his apartment in Bridgeport. He's using him as bait to draw me out." Aurora's blood ran cold. "Where?" "An abandoned freight yard off the Dan Ryan Expressway," Damien said, releasing her and turning toward the door. "I'm leaving now." "I'm going with you," she demanded. Damien stopped, looking over his shoulder. "Absolutely not." "He's my brother, Damien. Carmine wants to punish him because of what I did. If I don't go, I'll never forgive myself. And I will never forgive you." For a long, agonizing moment, the boss of the Chicago underworld weighed the defiance of a 24-year-old waitress. Finally, he gave a curt, stiff nod. "Get your coat." The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time the convoy of black SUVs pulled into the rusted, decaying husk of the abandoned freight yard. Lightning cracked across the Chicago skyline, illuminating the skeletal remains of old train cars and shipping containers. It was the perfect place for a graveyard. Damien's men fanned out silently, melting into the shadows with suppressed rifles. Damien kept Aurora close behind him, his body acting as a physical shield as they stepped out into the freezing mud. "Russo!" a voice echoed through the metal canyon. Carmine Moretti stood beneath the harsh glare of a portable halogen work light, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. Kneeling in the mud beside him, his face bruised and bleeding, was Tommy. Aurora gasped, lunging forward, but Damien's arm shot out, catching her around the waist like an iron bar. "You actually brought the girl," Carmine sneered, wiping rain from his forehead. "I got to admit, Damien, I didn't think you had a sentimental bone in your body. Turns out your weakness wears a waitress apron." "Let the boy go, Carmine," Damien said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the pounding rain. It wasn't a request. It was an executioner's final warning. "This is between you and me. The Bennett family is under my crest now." Carmine laughed, cocking a silver revolver and pressing the barrel directly against the back of Tommy's head. Tommy squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing Aurora's name. "Under your crest!" Carmine spat. "This rat gave you up for pennies, and the bitch cost me my best crew. I'm going to blow his brains out, and then I'm going to take my time with her while you watch." "Carmine," Damien said softly, a terrifying smile curling the corner of his mouth. "Look up." Carmine frowned, his eyes darting to the rusted catwalks above. A single red laser dot was painted directly on the center of Carmine's forehead. A second dot appeared on the chest of the guard to his left, then another, and another. Rocco and the sniper team had flanked them in the darkness. "You're surrounded by ghosts, Carmine," Damien whispered. "Drop the gun." Realization dawned on Carmine's face, twisting it into a mask of pure, desperate rage. Knowing he was a dead man, he made a split-second, suicidal choice. He pulled the gun away from Tommy and snapped it toward Aurora. "Damien!" Aurora screamed. Time fractured. Damien moved with terrifying speed, throwing his body violently over Aurora's just as Carmine pulled the trigger. Bang! Damien grunted as the bullet tore through the meat of his left shoulder. In the exact same millisecond, The rail yard erupted. Rocco's sniper rifle cracked from the catwalk. Carmine's men dropped to the mud like cut marionettes before they could even raise their weapons. Carmine stumbled backward, his shoulder shattered by the sniper fire, dropping his revolver into the dirt. Damien didn't fall. Bleeding through his dark sweater, he pushed Aurora safely behind a rusted steel beam. He drew his Glock 19, walking slowly, deliberately through the rain toward the gasping Lucchese capo. Wait! Damien, we can make a deal!" Carmine pleaded, clutching his bleeding arm, crawling backward in the mud. "I'll give you the docks, all of it!" Damien stood over him, an angel of death illuminated by the lightning. "You touched what is mine," Damien said, his voice devoid of all human emotion. He raised the weapon and fired twice into Carmine's chest, ending the Lucchese threat forever. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the torrential rain. Tommy was still kneeling in the mud, shaking uncontrollably. Aurora ran to him, falling to her knees and throwing her arms around her brother. Damien holstered his weapon, pressing a hand against his bleeding shoulder. He walked over to the siblings. Tommy flinched, expecting the Mafia boss to finish the job. "You sold my life for 80 grand, Tommy," Damien said coldly, looking down at the broken man. "By every law of my world, I should leave you in this mud. But your sister bought your life with her bravery." Damien reached into his coat and tossed a thick stack of banded $100 bills into the dirt at Tommy's knees. "Take this. Get on a bus tonight. Leave Chicago, leave Illinois, and never come back. If my men see your face in this city again, I won't hesitate. Understand?" Tommy nodded frantically, scrambling to grab the money. He looked at Aurora, guilt and shame burning in his eyes, but she couldn't look at him anymore. The brother she knew was gone. She slowly stood up, turning her back on him, and walked toward Damien. She reached up with trembling hands, pressing her fingers against Damien's bleeding shoulder. "You took a bullet for me." Damien's dark eyes softened, the ruthless monster melting away to reveal the man underneath. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a mixture of rain and mud from her cheek. "I told you, Aurora," he murmured, pulling her flush against his chest, right there in the rain-soaked graveyard of his enemies. "You belong to me, and a king always protects his queen." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, consuming kiss that tasted of rain, gunpowder, and an unbreakable vow. Aurora kissed him back with equal desperation, wrapping her arms around his neck. The waitress from the St. Regis was dead. In her place stood the undisputed queen of the Chicago Syndicate, bound by blood, loyalty, and a love forged in absolute fire. Did Aurora make the right choice, staying with a ruthless kingpin, or is she just dancing with the devil in a gilded cage? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If this real-life mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding, true crime stories. See you in the next video.